SoundCartel.
As the battle intensifies between Apple and Spotify for podcast domination, and Facebook and Google don't want to be left behind, we speak to Triton Digital's Managing Director Sharon Taylor to find out what it all means for podcasters, and how many downloads of your podcast is considered good.
It's actually shocking how quickly they start falling off a cliff. So in all the content that we host in Omny, we saw that the top 1% of shows get 28,000 downloads in the 30 days after release of their episode. And then it drops quite substantially to the top 50% of shows, which is 100 downloads in the first 30 days after release. Huge differences. But the pattern remains the same. It starts very high and then it actually drops a lot quicker than you think it's going to be. We have people that bemoan the fact that they're not getting past 1,000 downloads. 1,000 downloads is actually really good when you look at these numbers. But success and what good is still up to you to set your own targets and your own goals out of it.
I'm Nick Schildberger, Managing Director of audio agency SoundCartel, and this is Podcasting Essentials. Welcome to episode 5 of season 5. And joining me is producer and co-host Nicole Goodman.
G'day Nick, great to be with you again.
And also joining us in the studio is Triton Digital Managing Director Sharon Taylor.
Hello friends, good to see you.
Hi Sharon, welcome back to Podcasting Essentials. Isn't it nice to be doing this face to face?
It is a brave new world of 2020 something.
So Sharon, podcasting news seems to have exploded in recent weeks, and we know you're across it, so let's work through what's what. Starting with the big announcements from Apple and Spotify. Nicole and I touched on these in the last episode, but can you talk us through the latest moves from two of the biggest podcast players?
Yeah, and what moves they've made as well. So they both came out and launched their premium paid subscription products. Spotify announced theirs and hinted at it earlier in the year. Apple pipped them at the post a little bit to announce theirs a little while ago. And so you now both, as podcasters, can launch subscription products for your members and listeners through each of those platforms. And they've both done it a little bit differently. Apple is through their Apple Podcast Connect product, and you need to kind of bifurcate your hosting a little bit. You need to have a different audio file that you upload specifically and directly into their audio manager, and then that becomes available if people choose to buy your podcast, the premium version of it in-app through the Apple Podcast app. Spotify have made it available through a podcast hosting company that they own called Anchor. So again, bifurcate your hosting. So NPR put their free version still on NPR and are making an ad-free version for paid subscribers through Spotify. So different ways of skinning the same cat, but the cat is definitely getting skinned in audio.
If I want to have a paid podcast in Apple and Spotify...
You can.
And a free version, do I have to host it 3 different ways?
You don't have to, but that is definitely the way that the industry is moving. And I think at the moment a lot of publishers are in trial mode and testing to see what's going to resonate with their audience. But yes, the easiest thing to do would be to stay with your own hosting provider and decide to upload a premium version of that into Apple, but that comes with its own pain points, to be completely candid. So if you have 300 episodes and you want to make 200 of them in your back catalogue available to paid subscribers, you need to upload those individually into Apple's system. And so it really is designed as a way for you to start testing out premium content, bonus content. I think Apple's is less about ad-free versions, whereas Spotify's kind of seems a bit more, do you want ads or do you not, seems to be the main switch that you're flicking.
Well, then on your Omny Studio platform, there's the option to do ad-free content as well. Correct,
yes. I think the difference there is that you can have an ad-free feed in a hosting provider like Omny, but it still is kind of going far and wide. We also have a secure distribution product in Omny Studio, which is like tokenized premium feeds, but it relies on you as the publisher hooking that into your existing paywall systems. So it's a little bit more enterprise and a little bit more flexible for people that are already doing something with a membership base somewhere in their business. Whereas Apple and Spotify, credit to them, have made it simple for people that are right there in the app that are consuming podcasts to kind of get access to that stuff. Apple is easier than Spotify's, if I'm being honest. Spotify, probably to get around Apple charging them for in-app purchases, you see a lock icon on your podcast screen. You know to push that somehow. You get taken out to an Anchor landing page, you pay, and then you come back. Whereas Apple's is true in-app purchases. So I think they're on a bit of a better footing, personally.
Yeah, the downside to it being easier with Apple is that you've got to give Apple a bigger cut of the revenue.
Yeah.
Correct. Well, I mean, they both come out with different price points. So Spotify are locking it down, I think $2.99, $4.99, $7.99 are the three things that you as a creator can choose. And they're taking nothing for the first 2 years, and then it's 5% thereafter. Apple's doing it a bit differently. You can, as a creator, set your price. It can be as low as 49 cents. And then in the first year of someone being a subscriber, you lose 30% of that revenue to Apple for the privilege of doing it through their system. And then after the first year, it goes to 15%. So very similar to the App Store stuff that they've got going on.
Yeah. And the good news for our clients is that, as complicated as you've made that all sound, we look after that all for them.
Yeah, that's right. Correct. Yeah. It is. Look, podcasting, as it professionalizes, is getting more and more complex. I think the important thing to focus on is that these giants in the industry are making moves to make audio a first-class citizen and to shine a light on paid podcasts. And any way that a creator can make money from their show is great. I think it opens up a lot of opportunities for brands, especially because maybe they've got clients that are used to paying for things, and maybe they could start releasing like a paid version of audio content. So it's more options, but with options comes added complexity.
And one of those areas of potential confusion is the word subscribe.
Yes, yep. This has been around for a long while. I think Spotify was the first ones to come out and say follow in a show instead of subscribe. Apple secretly in their last beta started putting out follow, and so people thought that this subscription product was coming. For a long time, like for as long as I can remember in podcasting, you end an episode by saying subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And now that messaging is going to need to change, really importantly, because we are moving to a place in the industry where subscribe means paid and follow or listen or find means the free version of it.
Once we get our heads around that, it will become simpler because subscribe is money. And
yes.
But right now, I think it's going to be a little bit confusing. And so it's important for brands to make sure they get that messaging really clear.
Yeah.
Correct, yep.
The other thing that's made things a little bit more complicated in recent times is Apple have mucked up their Apple Podcast Connect a little bit.
It wasn't the smoothest of rollouts for 14.5, their latest iOS, and then everything they did behind the scenes. But they kind of shifted a whole paradigm, and I guess with that again comes technical challenges.
Part of that shift, though, is that they're not solely relying on an RSS feed anymore to distribute podcasts. Now, the technology behind that is not important, but what is important is what the flow-on effect is for brands and podcasters releasing episodes, especially regular episodes, because it's not necessarily going to be released exactly at the moment you want it to be anymore, is it?
Correct. I think they'll tighten it up, but they have made a technical change in how the latest iOS works, which means that episodes will show up at a lower frequency than they have been on Apple Podcasts. So you push publish on your hosting provider like Omny, and instantly it should appear on Spotify and Apple and other places. Because of this technical change that Apple has made, their system will check our feeds less frequently, which means you might be waiting up to 24 hours in the worst case scenario for an episode to drop.
So up to 24 hours is a long time. Hopefully that's the exception, not the rule.
Correct, yes.
We, as you know, have a daily business podcast that we schedule at the moment to release at 6 a.m. every morning. Would you advise us and people like us that are scheduling daily or weekly content in the morning to maybe bring that back closer to midnight so it's there or got a better chance of being there by 6 a.m?
I would think so. I think that given the way listeners interact with your content at the moment, whether you publish at 5:55 or midnight, to them it makes little difference. But for your own peace of mind and to make sure that it's there, especially as we move through these teething issues that we're all experiencing with Apple Podcasts at the moment, better safe than sorry. Put it out as close to the night before as you can or the morning of, and go from there.
But Sharon, who's benefiting from this change? Why not just stick with being able to schedule down to the minute?
Well, I think it was an inadvertent byproduct of what they've done. I mean, all podcast catchers, all podcatchers out there at the moment poll feeds at different time intervals, and we do see differences in how quickly an episode will appear on a Spotify versus an Apple. There'll be technical reasons that Apple made this change, probably to do with how they're moving podcasts in the future. Largely, I'd assume it's to do with the paid subscriptions that they've launched as well. Maybe there's a bit of like less load on their system. Who knows what the big fruit is thinking? We just need to react, I think, as best we can, which has always been the way with Apple in the space. They change the way that they want RSS tags to function, and then we all adapt.
Comply, yeah.
One last one on Apple Podcast Connect, which is the little tick box that some people may or may not know about that allows your podcast to be indexed by other podcast apps beyond Apple.
Correct.
There's been a change there, hasn't there?
Yes, Apple has now put that tick box front and centre so that you, when you log into Apple Podcast Connect, have the choice as to whether or not your show will show up in those third-party apps like Pocket Casts or Overcast and those types of things. And there was a lot of confusion of late around what was causing episodes to disappear from the library of Apple and all kinds of apps. And I think we're still not really any closer to understanding what the intended behaviour versus the unintended behaviour was. But yes, there is a tick box. Be very thoughtful about whether or not you want to tick that. I think in large part, podcasts, you still want to be as far and wide as possible. To be where listeners are is still the best growth strategy until you get to a point where you start siphoning it down. So yeah, I'd be ticking it. I'd let people be finding my show.
And for existing shows,
it should be ticked. The default behaviour, we have been told by Apple, is that it should have been left on. But for new shows, you'll get the choice.
Okay. Either way, probably best to check. If you want your podcast to be everywhere, make sure that's ticked.
Correct.
Now, Spotify has also announced Spotify Green Room, which will be similar to Clubhouse. If Spotify's jumping on this live audio trend, it must be here to stay, right? Where do you see it heading, and how should brands be getting involved?
Yeah, social audio is an interesting one at the moment. I think, again, it's an indication that audio is becoming a first-class citizen. And I think that it isn't podcasting, it is very different, and it's a different way for you to interact with a potential listener group or, your clientele. Spotify are doing it to become the largest audio app out there. They want people in their ecosystem to be able to go through live podcasts, music, and all within one app. Everyone is coming out with a Clubhouse competitor. Yep. There's Reddit, there's LinkedIn, Twitter Spaces is out there, Facebook has announced something. And it really, you need to think about it in the same way that you would think about your social media strategy, I think, in that you are tailoring different posts and different content for each of those platforms. And now that's extending to audio as well. You're not going to be able to be everything to everyone on every platform. Trial them, see what works, and then make a decision from there.
You mentioned Facebook, which is also moving and shaking in the audio space. Their latest edition is a mini player powered by Spotify, along with sound bites and another Clubhouse equivalent with live audio rooms. Why is Facebook suddenly getting so involved, and what opportunities will it present?
I've got two answers there. One is Facebook getting involved because they can see the writing on the wall in terms of audio. The other is probably a more sceptical answer, which is, along with iOS 14.5, they will start getting blocked from being able to get insights in third-party apps. Right. And so the longer that they can keep you as a direct Facebook user on their system, the more money that they will make by serving you ads and other bits and pieces. So it makes sense to me that they would be trying to build their own audio experiences within the app, because it is a contest for active users and amount of content that you're going to consume there. And so audio makes sense to me as an extension of what they've done. They did it with video a while ago, and the jury has come back in on how successful that was, especially for publishers. It's not the first time they've tried to do an audio player as well. Like, that has been in there with Spotify for music, I think, for quite a while. I think it is yet to be seen whether people on Facebook will want to experience long-form audio in there. But I do think, again, anywhere that an app is putting focus on audio and is pushing out podcasts and other bits and pieces, it's great for our industry.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very clear that the battle between Apple and Spotify has never been hotter. In your opinion, Sharon, who wins? And does it matter for podcasters, or is it all good news?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that the rising tide lifts all boats actually does apply here. I really do. I mean, Apple has been criticised largely by a lot of people in the industry that they have been sitting kind of inactive and dormant for so long, and now they've kind of taken this aggressive step in. They've sort of broken some stuff on the way through, so be careful what you wish for. But yeah, I think it's great for podcasters. It's great for audio creators in general, like for people to be getting this much awareness about it. There's probably a time coming where the professional audio creators, like the big brands and, the big names, are going to be able to do more with these tools that are coming out than probably the independent, which again is where you guys come into it, right? Like you can help guide those brands and those clients to like their strategy and what makes the most sense in this new world order of podcasting.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we shouldn't forget a little company called Google. A couple of years ago when they launched Google Podcast, they had some pretty bold ambitions. And although listening through Google Podcasts is still relatively small when compared to Apple and Spotify, like still single digits, I think, in percentage numbers.
At Omny, we see about 3%, I think, of all downloads come from Google Podcasts. It's very small. Spotify, in comparison, is 11%, and Apple is still the lion's share.
But it's their integration with search, which is huge for discoverability.
Correct. Yeah, Google want to have the most search results and the highest amount of relevance available for people when they look at things. Audio in Google search is still great for podcasters because you will search for a topic and then you will see that presented. I don't think that their strategy, it doesn't seem to me that they're going to start doubling down on the app. I think they really are moving into the search world and they want to have the best results possible. Indexing is going to be their biggest challenge there. They have a web ranker, right? Like they can see how many people go and visit a web page, and then when they present you search results, they know based on that web result ranker if it's good content or not. There's not really the equivalent of that in podcasting, which they're starting to transcribe all of their audio behind the scenes for that so that they can make sure that they've got like a good index. And then you would search for business essentials and ideally the show would come up because they know in theory and in practice what the audio is about. Whether or not that actually transcends into search results is anyone's guess, because I think that you might see 3 or 4 podcasts on there at the moment when you search for things, and there's a little bit of mystery in terms of how they're being indexed.
Well, continuing on from that, the Infinite Dial survey says that 73% of podcasts are found via searching the internet, making SEO and episode transcripts especially important. What are your tips for making transcripts the most effective they can be, Sharon?
Yeah, I think definitely transcripts are becoming more and more important. I don't know about in the Edison research if people understood if they were seeing a transcribed podcast or maybe they were just hunting for something and getting the Apple podcast result or similar.
Still the same thing though, if you're searching.
Correct. Apple and Google have podcast websites for each of the shows as well. And so it would have been people searching in Google and saying podcast name, podcast. Yeah. And then without fail, when you do that, the first result is always Apple Podcasts. And so you find it and then it takes you to the Apple, like the Omny FM show page version of it, but for Apple Podcasts. Right. So I don't know that people are intentionally searching and then finding a transcribed podcast in Google personally. Like I think that it's more Joe Rogan podcast because they've heard about Joe Rogan, or they are searching for like environmental podcast and then what their search results are could be transcribed content from Google or it could be actual search results from Google web crawlers. It's a bit of both. So I agree with you that it's important, but
whatever it is, I mean, it's getting the rankings for the podcasts up there.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, transcripts are definitely important, and you should check out Omny's blog because we just put out a blog post about this that I will now try to remember from the far reaches of my memory. No, you need to make sure it's relevant. It's the same as writing your website. Like, what do you want to be found for? And are those keywords, without keywords stuffing the content in your description and everything, are they helping people surface the content? Are they helping Apple and Google, who are transcribing it behind the scenes, to better their own search results in their platforms? Is your transcript helping those platforms surface content as well? So it's about good titling. It's not just saying episode 100 of the same show. It needs to be episode 100, good title description, good show notes. It needs to, if you are transcribing it yourself and you're putting it up on your own website, that's fantastic because it's another Google search result that is out there. If you transcribe this podcast, what you probably want to be searched for may not be in here, right? So you want to make sure that you're editing it down. You want to make sure that what you have in the transcript is applicable to the episode that's going out there.
But Google's transcribing anyway, so why do I have to do it?
True. I mean, Google and Apple are both transcribing for their own search results. It's so that they can surface the best content to people that are in their own ecosystems, which is great for Google because you are hunting around for a podcast about something on Google, like to the Edison research. You care because you maybe want to draw people to your own ecosystem as opposed to someone else's. Right. You care to have a transcript so that you can put it on your webpage so that your own website has a chance of being hit over and above like the Google podcast page. You care because accessibility is becoming more of a thing in podcasting, and it's just best practice.
Mm.
Yeah, James Cridlin was big on that as well, that accessibility is a big thing.
There's a group that is out there, Podcast Taxonomy Group, and there's a huge working group formed there to extend the RSS spec, and one of those tags that people are working on is a transcript tag, which would be very powerful for the industry. It would mean that a transcript would appear in third-party apps potentially, like Overcast, etc. It's a much better listener experience because not many people are using chapter markers at the moment to try and find the content, but if you can go through a transcript, you can easily find what you want and click to play to get to the right part of the audio sooner, and that's a great experience as a listener.
Watch this space.
Mm-hmm. Or listen to it.
Indeed. A slight change of tack now, I'd like to discuss benchmarking. We often get asked by clients, how many downloads is good?
Mm-hmm.
At Omny Studio, you host several 100 million downloads of podcasts every month, and you recently analysed all that data to create some benchmarks.
Yes.
So what is a good number of downloads, and what other interesting data did you uncover?
I think first, good is in the eye of the publisher. So whatever your business aim is in creating a podcast, whether it's good or not is totally different. So, I mean, if you are a commercial podcaster and you are wanting to build the largest podcast out there so that you can sell as much advertising, then good means you have to have millions of downloads so that you can sell millions of ad impressions. If you're a business and you are creating a branded podcast as a sales funnel for other things in your business, then maybe good is a handful of downloads because you've got a direct conversation going with those potential customers or your existing customers. When we crunch the numbers, it's actually shocking how quickly they start falling off a cliff. So in all the content that we host in Omny, we saw that the top 1% of shows get 28,000 downloads in the 30 days after release of their episode. And then it drops quite substantially to the top 50% of shows, which is 100 downloads in the first 30 days after release. Huge differences. And then within that top 1% of publishers, the numbers are even scarier. Like we're talking hundreds of thousands in the first 30 days. But the pattern remains the same. It starts very high and then it actually drops a lot quicker than you think it's going to be. And so, you know, we have people that bemoan the fact that they're not getting past 1,000 downloads. 1,000 downloads is actually really good when you look at these numbers. So, yeah, I think it's different to what people thought it was, but success and what good is still up to you to set your own targets and your own goals out of it.
And we'll link in the show notes to that whole report that you did.
Oh, great. Thanks.
And to finish, Sharon, we love it when you look into your crystal ball for us. What does the remainder of 2021 look like for podcasting? What's coming and what trends will we see? And what are the opportunities for brands listening to get involved?
Look, it's already been a huge year. We're not even halfway through and we've had premium subscriptions, we've had social audio, we've got platforms like LinkedIn, etc., coming out with their own audio products. What is ahead? I mean, who knows? That's not the best answer that I could give you, but I mean, I think we are honestly at such a fervour in the space right now. What the next company's going to come out with is anyone's guess. I think that looking back over the last 12 months, obviously the pandemic has condensed the growth of the industry, like the time frame for when we got to the place that we thought we were going to get to. New data came out yesterday that said that by 2022, I'm sure it was 2022, we're going to be a $2 billion industry. And so if you think that we'll hit $1 billion this year and then we're going to double, I mean, that growth is astronomical. I think that listening habits have changed because people have been staying at home. I think we're going to start seeing a lot more podcast listening on smart speakers. I think that we're going to see a bigger split between professional, quote-unquote, audio and the independent audio out there and how people are managing their audiences that way. It has been for the last few years and it will continue to be a wild ride in podcasting.
Well, it's certainly going to be a wild ride and we'll definitely have to get you back in here as the news keeps dropping throughout the year. Will you come back?
How could I stay away?
Well, that's it for this episode of Podcasting Essentials. Thank you, Sharon, so much for joining us.
Thank you. It was great.
It's been fabulous. So good to have you back.
Good to see people in person.
I know.
And thanks, Nicole, as always.
Absolute pleasure, Nick.
For more about us and how we can help you produce a podcast, you can visit soundcartel.com.au or our socials at SoundCartel AU.
And of course, during these crazy times, if you're after business insights and inspiration each morning, check out our daily podcast, Business Essentials Daily, wherever you're listening now.
From the team at SoundCartel, thanks so much for listening.
SoundCartel.